Today we'll be once again continuing our team previews, with today being the Dallas Cowboys. Before we get in the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below what team you want to see next. Without further ado, let's get into this preview of the Dallas Cowboys. First looking at their additions and losses. The first thing they did was bring in a new head coach, replacing Mike McCarthy with Brian Schottenheimer. I think that's how you say his name. I'm pretty sure he has some connections with Pete Carroll when I was doing my research. And part of what Pete Carroll does that I think he mentioned in like an introductory press conference or an interview that he might want to try to implement into the offense. I got this from, I believe, the Cowboys website, is that he likes to use a lot of shifts and motions, and a lot of pre-snap motion. And also in his career, his teams, I think, has led the league in rushing yards 2 years in his career as an offensive coordinator. And he also wants to use a lot of play action as well to, build off of that rushing success he's had. And Dak Prescott he didn't really have the best season last year with play action, but statistically through his career, he's been a pretty good play action quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. So I think what Schottenheimer is going to try and use in his offense will fit Dak. Now, the run game is to be determined because they had a lot of turnover at running back, and it wasn't the best rushing attack last year. They had a relatively bad rushing offense. So we'll see with their complete overhaul at running back, because I think they brought in 3 new guys, which we'll get into in a little bit. So if they can establish a good run game, I think this offense will do well with Schottenheimer. Going into more of their additions, the big addition they made was recently when they traded for George Pickens from the Steelers. I don't exactly remember what they give up. I'm going to quickly look up what they gave in the George Pickens trade. I think it was, let me see. So the Steelers traded George Pickens to the Cowboys for a 3rd and a 5th. The Steelers also sent a 7th to the Cowboys. So essentially they got George Pickens for a 3rd and a 5th. Mainly a 3rd. I think it was a relatively decent trade for both sides. I feel like the situation in Pittsburgh for Pickens was just not good, and they had to move on. And Dallas gets a very good receiver too next to CeeDee Lamb, which has been much needed. And you only gave up a 3rd. It's a little bit high of a pick, a 3rd, but I feel like George Pickens is worth a 3rd as a high-end receiver too. And we all know what Pickens can do as a receiver. I feel like people rate him really high because of all the crazy catches he makes. I still do think he's a solid receiver. He had 60 catches, 900 yards, and 3 touchdowns last year. 63 catches, 1,100 yards, and 5 touchdowns the year before. So he's obviously been a very productive receiver with very mediocre quarterback play. So I think with not only having CeeDee Lamb on the other side, but also having Dak Prescott, I do think he'll have a good season as that receiver too. Then going to the 3 main draft picks they made, at least that I think will start, at least based on the depth chart that we have. These seem like the rookies that will get a decent amount of playing time early on. There's other rookies we'll talk about too. First one being their 1st-round pick, Tyler Booker, guard out of Alabama that they took. I really like this pick. They have 3 Tylers on their offensive line with Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, and now Tyler Booker. But I like the Tyler Booker pick. I know people wanted them to maybe go with a running back, even though Gentry was off the board. Maybe go with one of the receivers, but I guess McMillan was off the board. So maybe they felt like it was best just to help protect Dak Prescott. And again, not getting a receiver ended up working out because they ended up trading for George Pickens. So I really liked the Tyler Booker pick in hindsight. I also liked it when they made the pick, especially because they lost Zach Martin to retirement. So I think he can be. Now, will he be Zach Martin? Who knows? But at least based on the last few years as Zach Martin was getting older, Booker can definitely be that replacement and then hopefully develop as well. Another loss that I didn't discuss, um, to kind of go off George Pickens, was Brandon Cooks. I think George Pickens is an upgrade over Brandon Cooks. They lost Brandon Cooks to the Saints. He's going back to the Saints, which is kind of cool. He had 300 yards, and 3 touchdowns with the Cowboys. So Pickens is a much improved upgrade. But back to the rookies, they had Jaden Blue, running back out of Texas. Texas has had a lot of running backs get drafted in the NFL. And he replaces Rico Dowdle, who had a very good year with Dallas at 1,300 total yards, 5 total touchdowns. He goes to the Panthers. They also bring in Miles Sanders, which we'll get into later. But I like the Jaden Blue pickup, just a solid running back. They're going to have they don't have like that number one guy. They also bring in Javonte Williams from Denver. Javonte had 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaged just under 4 yards a carry with Denver. I don't think they paid him any money. They also brought in Siobhan Revel. That was meant to put cornerback in front of his name. Forgot to do that. They bring in Siobhan Revel, corner, out of ECU. He did have the injury. I think it was an ACL injury. I'm not sure though. That he had very early on last season. So we'll see how he can recover off that. But if they can get him healthy, that's a very good pickup. He was so good at East Carolina. And then the other additions they made, they bring in Dante Fowler, from Washington. He had 10.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 12 QB hits. Very good pickup for them. But they got him, I think, on like a 1-year cheap deal. I think they got Javonte Williams on a 1-year cheap deal and Jack Sanborn. I think the only guy they paid a 2-year contract, at least that are notable pickups, is Kenneth Murray, who I think they paid like 2 years around $15 million. And on the Titans, Kenneth Murray had 90 plus tackles, he had 8 TFLs, 3.5 sacks with the Titans. So not a bad pickup. And even though he's your long-term contract, it's only 2 years, $15 million. And then Sanborn, he kind of had an underwhelming season last year with the Bears. I really liked Sanborn. But yeah, it wasn't the best season last year, but he is only 24, so he still has plenty of room to get better and get back to maybe what he was 2 years ago, and then improve from that point on. And again, it was like a 1-year deal, so if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I think it was a good flyer to take, especially when you also bring in Kenneth Murray, and they kind of replace what you had with Eric Kendricks. But Eric Kendricks wasn't even really a big-time starter for him anyway, so he didn't really play much for them. And then going off of their other losses real quick, they lost 2 edge rushers in DeMarcus Lawrence and Carl Lawson. Lawrence, obviously, very good for the Cowboys for so many years. He goes to Seattle. He only played 4 games last year, so his stats aren't going to be great. He had 3 sacks in those 4 games, but he is 32 years old, so maybe they wanted to go more youth, to pair alongside Micah Parsons. And then Carl Lawson, he's also on the older side at 29 years old, so he's almost in his 30s. He had 5 sacks last year for the Cowboys, so I think DeMarcus Lawrence is a big loss for them, obviously, but who knows if he wanted to be there? Who knows if they thought he was slowly going to decline with injuries and play? So if you get rid of him, the Dante Fowler is an upgrade over Carl Lawson. And then I think Kenneth Murray and Jack Sanborn are clear upgrades over Eric Kendricks. And then George Pickens is an upgrade over Brandon Cooks. And I think currently in 2025, Tyler Booker is better than what Zach Martin was in 2024. And then the 2 corners they lost. Jordan Lewis is a big loss. He had an interception, 8 pass deflections, 70-plus tackles. He signed a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Jags, one of the better nickel corners. I think he's a nickel corner. So that was a big loss for them. Amani Oriarie, I don't know how to say his name. Amani, he didn't really play too much for them and didn't have the best season. So I think outside of the losses of Jordan Lewis and Rico Dowdle, they pretty much upgraded in every other spot here. Some other losses they had: Trey Lance, Cooper Rush, Chinna Adoga, Chauncey Golston, Linval Joseph, Carlos Watkins, Eric Kendricks, who we mentioned earlier, and then Nick Vigil. None of those guys really were big impact players for the Cowboys. So I think overall they did well in the offseason. Now looking into their offense a little more. Their offense last year was 21st in points with 350 total points. At quarterback, we obviously know Dak Prescott is the guy there. They did also trade for Joe Milton. I don't think Joe Milton's going to play. I think Dak Prescott will go back to what he was, what he has been. It was just a rough up and down year, mainly down for the Cowboys, but I do expect Dak to go back to what we've seen from him. And I think the Cowboys can have a decent year. I know they have holes, but I think the spots that they don't have holes in, they have really good players. So I do think they can have a decent season. Running back, we obviously talked about. They kind of have just a lot going on there with Javonte Williams, Jaden Blue, and Miles Sanders. This depth chart right here, again, has Javonte as their starter now, but these depth charts aren't official or anything. I do think they'll just be splitting carries with him and Jaden Blue, but I do think Javonte will get the initial start just because he's the veteran there. I mean, maybe Miles Sanders gets a spot over Jaden Blue, but because they only used a fifth on Jaden Blue. And then, so their running back room probably won't be the best, but they do want to use that to sort of get that play action in the Schottenheimer offense. I mean, their O-line was okay when it comes to run blocking and just O-line in general. The starters that they currently have in Guyton, Smith, Cooper Beebe, and Terrence Steele had 37 penalties and 20 sacks allowed. Tyler Booker, obviously being the rookie, he comes in there at right guard. So overall, their O-line was just okay. They spent a first-round pick on Guyton, a first-round pick on Tyler Smith, a third-round pick on Cooper Beebe, a first-round pick on Tyler Booker. So they've invested in this O-line, and I really like Tyler Smith, and I like Tyler Booker. So I do think it'll be a very good O-line. They also drafted a Johnny Cornelius in the 6th round out of Oregon. Not too familiar with him. Going to the pass catchers, we obviously know what CeeDee Lamb's going to provide you. And I do like how Schottenheimer is going to do a lot of motions and stuff, because we did see CeeDee Lamb get used in like the backfield for some decent time last year for the Cowboys. And I do think they'll be able to move him all over the field on top of guys like Kevontae Turpin and Jalen Tolbert. So I do think that will greatly benefit this offense. We all know what George Pickens can bring. Jalen Tolbert, I really like Jalen Tolbert, the 3rd-round pick a few years ago. He had just under 50 catches, 600-plus yards, 7 touchdowns, and he's only 25 because he was drafted in 2022. So I really like Tolbert, pairing him alongside Pickens and CeeDee Lamb. You have Jalen Brooks, who was a 7th-round pick, Jonathan Mingo, who was a 2nd round from the Panthers, who you traded for. Don't know why they traded. Did they trade a 4th for him? Or they might have even traded a 3rd-round pick for him. That was not the best trade, in my opinion. And then Kevontae Turpin, mainly a special teams guy, but you definitely can utilize him. And maybe in this offense, he'll get utilized even more than just a special teams guy. But when he is on special teams, he is a great returner. And then the last piece on this offense, Jake Ferguson, is their number 1 tight end. He didn't really have the best season. Now, again, the quarterback was very inconsistent for him. Because 2 years ago, he had a Pro Bowl season, 70-plus catches, 750 yards, 5 touchdowns. And then this last season, he had under 60 catches, only about 500 yards, and he didn't get a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. So a little bit of an underwhelming season for Jake Ferguson, but I do think he's still a very good tight end. And with bringing in guys like George Pickens, hopefully getting a better run game, more consistent quarterback play, because Dak hopefully is healthier. I do think Ferguson can get back to playing like that Pro Bowl caliber. But overall, I think this can be a very good offense, and I don't think they'll be in the bottom half in scoring. Moving on to the defense, they were 31st in points allowed with 468, so not a great defense, but when you look at all the injuries they had, it's not crazy that they had a bad season. But I do think when you add in health and the offseason moves they made, I think it can be a very solid defense. First, starting off in that D line, we obviously mentioned Dante Fowler coming over from Washington, had a 10 plus sack season, 2 forced fumbles. While I think they only got him on a 1 year deal, he's still a good player for that 1 year, so I like him. I like Donovan Ezeraku, who they brought in from Boston College in the second round. I really liked him. Thought he could have gone very late in the first, so I think that's a good pick. Pair him alongside Micah Parsons. We all know who Micah Parsons is. He's one of the better players in football. Not much to talk about there. You also got Jay Toya, who they got in the 7th round from UCLA. I like Marshawn Kneeland. The D tackles I really like with Mozzie Smith and Osa Odigizua. Mozzie Smith had 40 tackles and a sack. Osa had 47 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. So I really like that D tackle duo they have with guys like Fowler, Parsons, and Ezeraku. And they brought back Osa Odigizua. I think they extended him this offseason. So I really like that front 7. The linebacker core is where it gets a little questionable. I really like DeMarvion Overshown, but he got hurt last year. I think it was an ACL, and he might not even return next season. So while I do like him in general, this season he might not be able to play. And with that, I don't know how much I love their linebacker core. They do run a 4-3. So they're going to have like 2 to 3-ish. Well, right here it actually says it looks like they have 4 D linemen and then like 2 or 3 linebackers. Outside of Overshown, with his absence, you obviously have Kenneth Murray and Jack Sanborn, who we talked about. Kenneth Murray, solid player last year for the Titans, as we said. And Jack Sanborn, a little bit of an underwhelming season, but he's still young and he still could improve. But I think there's a little bit of question marks with those guys. So I think that would be the weakness of this defense going into next season. And then the secondary, you have Trayvon Diggs, obviously your standout corner. He also suffered an injury late in the season. He missed 11, or no. Yeah, he suffered an injury late in the season. And his expected return, I think, is about halfway through through this season. So you're going to miss Diggs potentially for half the season. Deron Bland obviously had that one great year of all those pick sixes. He only played 7 games. You got Malik Hooker as your strong safety. He had 2 picks and 80 tackles last year. Donovan Wilson had a pick and 80-plus tackles as well. So you like those guys at the safety position. They did have an average pass defense last year. They were 12th in the league in interceptions. They were also 20. They were 3rd in sacks with 51, and I think their D-line got better. So I think if the secondary can stay healthy, mainly Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland. You also got Israel Mukuamu, who had 2 picks last year of his own. Not too familiar with the guys outside of that. So if their secondary can stay healthy, I think they'll be a good defense because I trust their D-line to get better than they were last year, and they were already pretty good last year. I think it's just their linebacker core that is the main question mark, because their run defense was pretty bad as well on top of their run offense. And I think part of that is to do with their linebackers. Quickly looking at their special teams, Brandon Aubrey is their kicker. We all know about Brandon Aubrey, one of the better kickers in the league. He was about 85% for the field, 100% from extra points. But mainly the thing that gets brought up when you talk about Brandon Aubrey is the 14 from 17 from 50 plus, 14 for 16 from the 40 to 49 range. One of the better deep kickers in the league. And then not to mention, Kevontae Turpin is one of the better return men in the league as well. So expect it to be a very good special teams group. Now moving on to their schedule and their floor and their ceiling and their overall prediction. I do expect a much better season from the Cowboys, and I think their schedule is not insanely hard, but I don't think it's the easiest either. I think it's in the middle. You got the Eagles. You obviously have to play the Eagles twice, the Commanders twice. Teams like the Lions, Vikings, Packers. You get the whole NFC North. But I do think they can get wins versus I do think if you look at games they probably have a good chance to get or they're relatively favored to win, I think you can throw the Giants 2 games in there. I think you can throw the Jets game, the Panthers game. Um, I think like one of the 4 games versus the Commanders or Eagles. So that's 5. Um, maybe the Cardinals and then the Raiders. So I think their floor is 7 wins. It is a tough schedule, but they do have their easy games. And I think they can, bare minimum, get to 7 wins. And then I do think their ceiling is very high because the Cowboys historically have gotten a lot of wins in the regular season and then just sort of fizzled out in the playoffs. So I do think their ceiling is very high and they do have the ability to get a lot of wins. I don't think they'll get a ton of wins because their floor is also low-ish. But I think they could sweep the Commanders. I think they can get one win versus the Eagles, beat the Giants twice, beat the Bears, beat the Packers. I could see a world where their only losses are to the Eagles, the Chiefs, and then one of the Lions or Vikings. So I think their ceiling could honestly be somewhere around 13, 14 wins. I don't think they'll get that. This is the ceiling that we're talking about. This is the best of the best if everything goes their way. And obviously that's very likely not going to happen. But I think they have the talent to get a lot of wins if they get lucky. But I do think the holes on their team also can limit their wins that they get, which is why their floor is on the lower side. Because they have a lot of holes, as I mentioned before, but they also have a lot of superstar talent. So if the superstar talent is healthy and playing well, I think they can get a lot of wins and overcome those holes they have. But if they have a little bit of bad injury luck, if some of their top guys don't play as great, I don't think those holes will be hidden, and I think those weaknesses can result in them getting a lot of losses. So I do think they have a lot of variance in their schedule. So my final prediction is 11 wins, 11-6 for the Cowboys. A very good season, much needed bounce back season after the roller coaster that was last season. But I do think it's very hard to predict this Cowboys season. I do think it could go so many different ways. But with that being said, that concludes our brief preview of the Cowboys for this upcoming season. Let me know your thoughts on it, how you think the Cowboys will do this season. Let me know in the comments as well what team you want to see next. Subscribe if you're new, like the video if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.